So the first thing that I wanted to go into was kind of my training philosophy, and this will mostly apply to simplistic commands or simple commands, but I'll also utilize them in the process of training compound commands, but it's a little bit more complex, obviously, when you're training a compound command. So I have 7 steps that I go through, and I'll explain each of them as I go through them, but I'll give you a quick overview right now. The first step in training any command is getting your dog into position. There's a few different ways of how you can get your dog into position. My favorite is luring or targeting. You can capture the behavior, which means you simply, find them already doing the behavior. Maybe they do it naturally, and you capture them in that moment. And then you can do physical manipulation. The whole goal with this command, or this step inside of the process, is you need them to do the command or do the behavior in order to reinforce it, in order to train them to do it consistently. The second part inside of this process is marking the behavior. So that's why we have the clicker. I generally, when I'm first training a dog, when I'm first getting used to a dog, I need to condition them to that clicker. And all that means is I need to teach them that this means good, essentially. So what I'll do is I'll just click, give them a treat, click, give them a treat, click, give them a treat. This is kind of based on the Pavlov theory, where he rang a bell before he fed them, before he fed the dogs every single time. He did some other not so great things, but one of the learnings we came from that is that when you have a primary reinforcer, such as food, prey drive, play drive, or attention, you can take those primary reinforcers, and all that means is that the dog finds those naturally rewarding, and you can associate them with a secondary reinforcer, a secondary reward. And what that is, in this case, is the clicker. A lot of people, they'll condition the dog to know what the word good means, because you're always petting the dog and saying, good boy, good girl. And so what you're essentially doing is you're associating the word good and good boy with that primary reinforcer of attention. So you're kind of teaching your dog what that means. And it's the same thing with the word no. Frequently they'll say no inside of a loud voice, maybe they'll little smack their dog or something, and you're teaching the dog that the word no means bad. And so while dogs can't have the same linguistics that we have, the same vocabulary that we have, they are smart, and they'll build these associations over time. That's why you'll see the funny YouTube videos where the guy will say, you want to go on a walk? And as soon as he starts to say, you want to go on the dog's already at attention, everything, because the owner has consistently done that, so it begins to associate the walk with that phrase. The third part that we're going to do is we're going to release the dog from the behavior. You'll notice that, at least for me and all my training techniques, I always release the dog as long as it applies. There's some behaviors that are just kind of one-off things, and there's not necessarily a release, but I like to use the word okay, and so I'll get the dog into the sit position, into the down position, into the touch position, all these different positions, and then I'm going to release them with that word. The reason why I like doing that is it innately teaches them how to stay. If you don't have a release word, then when you tell your dog to sit, they're free to get up immediately, or you have to teach them how to stay separately. So I like to use the release word because it teaches them how to stay naturally, and this helps in many different ways. You can get your dog to sit before you feed them, before they go out the door, and then you can use that release word. I've also used the release word when punishing my dog. So let's say my dog, chews up some furniture or does something wrong. I can be like, no, and I can get angry at them. And so then they start to, because I've associated that with negativity over time, they're sad, and then I'll release them from their punishment, basically. It's really funny with my Rottweiler because, I'll discipline him for something, and then he'll kind of sit there all sad, and then I'll say, okay, and he becomes even more happy than he was before the punishment. And I really enjoy that with the release word because, one, they already know it from command training, and then two, any punishment is short-lived. You're not psychologically scarring your dog where you're going to get mad at them for the next 2 or 3 hours. They don't know if you're mad or not mad. So any sort of punishment or discipline, I recommend, one, you keep your emotions in check, and then two, you give them a little release word from that punishment, and it teaches them a lesson of the punishment, but at the same time, once they've served their penance or their prison sentence, then they're out of that punishment and they can be a happy dog again. The fourth step fourth step is contingent upon you being confident that they're going to obey your command, and that is introducing a command word. So you'll notice in my raising verbal videos, when I first started training her how to sit or how to down, I didn't introduce that release word immediately. I waited until I was confident that she would obey me, and then I added in that release word. And the reason for that is you don't want to desensitize your dog to that command word. And that's honestly why I use the word rump instead of sit, is because frequently at the park you have strangers coming up to your dog and they're like, sit, 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 sit. And when someone tells you to do something and you don't have to do it, and there's no repercussions for not doing it, the dog just learns over time that they don't have to do it. So by not using the command word until they are consistently getting into position, you make sure to not desensitize them to that command word. And the fifth step to training a command is going to be fading the lure. If you've watched the Raising Verbal series, you know that currently I'm in the process of fading the lure in the down command. And that's because, you have to follow the dog all the way down in order to get them into position. And obviously you don't want to have to do that forever. So the process of fading the lure is what I generally do is I do a less exaggerated or a less pronounced movement. I'm still coming close to that original movement, but I am slowly getting less and less exaggerated with it. The nice thing is you've already taught the dog with the verbal command word. So with the down command, for example, I can say down, and then I can do a less exaggerated movement. And if she doesn't fall into position, I'll do a little bit more and a little bit more until she does fall into position. But over time, you want to steadily reduce the amount of movement or the amount of lure that you have to do to get your dog into that position. And the end goal here is over time, you can go from this to this to this to this until you're just doing it. See, look at that. That's awesome. Good girl. You're a great example. But you can reduce that movement to get your dog into that position. And that's the end goal, right? You want to have essentially two ways to get most commands, which are going to be a hand gesture and also a verbal command. So we're associating that hand gesture and that verbal command with getting them down into position. The key here is you want to have a success rate of about 70 to 80%. You always want to be raising your grading criteria slowly so the dog is succeeding. If your dog is not succeeding 70 to 80% of the time, then you know you've increased difficulty too quickly. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but there's a few ways that you can increase difficulty. The sixth step in the process is going to be extinguishing the treat. So when you first train a command, you have to find some way of rewarding your dog for that. And so with me and my dogs, because they're very food motivated, I use food. I just use little slices of turkey that are, low fat, pretty healthy, and they love them. Whereas other dogs I've known, they just love and adore attention. So maybe you can use attention instead of using food. Whatever it is, you want to eventually be able to get your dog into position and follow your commands without having that reinforcer, that primary reinforcer. So what I like to do is I like to slowly fade these things. Once they've done everything consistently well, they're following my command word, I've faded the lure, I can start to give them treats every other time, every third time, etc. And then that way, when you're out and about, you can get your dog into position and you don't necessarily have to give them like a reward. Although many times I'll, pet my dogs if they do what I want them to do. So you're always gonna have the option of giving them praise for the reward, but you don't want to have them obeying you to be contingent upon you having food or petting them. So that's the goal of this step, is to slowly but surely fade out that reward. And you can always refresh them by coming back and doing a training session with rewards. You just don't want to be consistently dependent on having rewards to have your dog listen to you. That's the goal here. Some dogs, if you don't have food, then they're just not going to pay attention to you. So this step in the process is to eliminate the necessity of having food or praising them in order to obey you. And then the final step in this command, and this is an everlasting step, is increasing difficulty level. You'll notice here I'm in a small room, it's quiet, there's no distractions really. This is what I would consider like a low difficulty arena. And then I can increase difficulty in many different ways. I can ask the dog to do the behavior more perfect. So sometimes when I'm teaching a down command, the dog will lay down, but it'll turn on its side. And so I can, stop rewarding that, and I can demand that the dog lie down in the proper position in order to get a treat. I can bring in distractions, so I can bring in my other Rottweiler. I can move out into a more distractible area, such as I can go out into the living room, into the dining room. I can try to do training while we're cooking. I can take her out into the front yard. And so this is like levels in a video game that you're trying to progress through. If like the golden rule here is still that you want to have a 70 to 80% success rate. For instance, if I take this dog that is pretty good at lying down on command and I take her to a busy park, do you think she's going to succeed there? Probably not, right? She might have a 5% success rate or a 2% success rate. So you want to increase the difficulty level, whether it's demanding a more perfect behavior or it's adding distractions or whatever else you can think of. You want to increase that difficulty level slow enough to where your dog is still succeeding 70 to 80% of the time, or else they're going to get discouraged, they're not going to enjoy training, you're going to get frustrated. So the key with this part, and like I said, this part of the process can be as long as you want it to be depending on your lifestyle. For Bandit, for most of my dogs, I'm not doing competition level training. I just want them to listen to me and be good dogs. So my process isn't necessarily as rigorous as if I was going to competitions, if I can't think of many more examples, but if I just really wanted my dog to be perfect, like those dogs you see in competitions or on TV where they like snap into position immediately, I don't have that requirement. I just want my dogs to be nice to live around, to listen to me when I tell them to do something. So this step is really up to you and how far that you want to take it. If you want to take it to the point where, you can go inside of a crowded park with other dogs barking at your dog and your dog, obeys commands instantly, that's totally up to you. The whole point of this step is take it as far as you want to take it, but ensure that along the way, your dog still has a 70 to 80% success rate, or else they're going to get discouraged, you're going to get discouraged, and it's not going to work well. So please like and subscribe. I'll be doing a few commands after this, some simplistic ones to start, and then over time we'll be doing more and more complex commands and doing some compound commands later on in this series.